Behind a quiet grocery store, two little girls huddled together, shivering in the cold. Their cheeks were red, their tiny coats far too thin for the biting wind. "Please don't tell we're not bad," one whispered, clutching a torn teddy bear as if it were the only piece of safety left in the world. In that fragile moment, a man who had everything, wealth, power, success, stumbled upon them. What he discovered next would not only change their lives, but awaken something inside of him that had long been forgotten. This is not just a story about survival, it's about family, redemption, and the kind of love that finds you when you least expect it. If you believe in second chances and the power of kindness, stay with us and subscribe to Hidden Echo Stories, because this tale may touch your heart in ways you'll never forget. The evening air carried the kind of chill that seemed to whisper secrets through the cracks of forgotten alleys. Autumn leaves danced in slow circles, settling against damp pavement while the faint scent of roasted coffee still clung to his hands. Caleb Whitmore should have been heading straight for his waiting SUV, the driver already idling at the curb, but something tugged at him that night. A gentle pull, not loud, not demanding, just enough to make him take the longer route around the block. He was a man whose life was mapped to the minute, yet for reasons he could not name, he stepped away from the script. Children's laughter spilled from the park nearby, sharp and bright against the muted gray sky. Parents gathered coats around small shoulders and carried their little ones away from the chill. Caleb paused, jaw tight, his breath curling into the evening air. He turned quickly, almost like he was fleeing from that sound, unwilling to acknowledge the ache that it stirred in him. His coffee had already gone lukewarm, bitter in his mouth, but he swallowed anyway, more out of habit than need. The alley behind the grocery store was narrow and uninviting, lined with bent trash bins and cardboard softened by rain. He would have passed it without a second glance, but the faintest sound stopped him. A hiccuped sob, too fragile to ignore. He froze, listening. Another soft cry followed, thin and raw, the kind that reached into your chest before you had time to prepare for it. His pulse quickened, his feet moving almost without permission. The shadows revealed two small forms pressed against a recycling bin. At first glance, they seemed more like fragile birds than children. Knees tucked to chests, arms wrapped tightly around each other, curls tangled from wind and dust. One clutched a torn teddy bear, its missing eye making it look as weary as they did. The other held a nearly empty grocery bag. A bruised apple and a sleeve of crackers rattled inside, hardly enough for dinner. They could not have been older than 6. Twins, unmistakably. The resemblance was written in the same eyes, the same trembling lips, the same way their tiny bodies leaned toward one another as if one heartbeat might keep them both alive. Caleb's breath hitched. He had negotiated deals worth millions without blinking, faced boardrooms of competitors with steady resolve. Yet in that dim alley he found his throat unbearably dry. The smaller girl lifted her head first. She tried to straighten her spine, pretending to be braver than she felt, though her voice betrayed her when she whispered, "Please don't tell, we're not bad." Her words were broken but careful, as if they had been practiced. A plea learned through experience. Caleb crouched slowly, the sharp fabric of his suit pulling awkwardly at the motion. It felt unnatural to be so close to the ground, but instinct urged him to soften the space between them. "Where are your parents?" His voice came out rougher than intended, and immediately he regretted it. The taller twin looked at her sister first, a glance heavy with unspoken rules, then finally whispered, "Mommy said she would come back, but it's been too long." A strand of hair fell across her cheek, lifted by the cold breeze. Her fingers, red and chapped, trembled as she adjusted her grip on the teddy bear. Caleb's chest tightened. He noticed details he had trained himself to overlook in others: the thin coats, the flushed skin, the way hunger had etched itself into their still-growing faces. He searched their small grocery bag again, his jaw tightening at the sight of the meager contents. 2 crackers and half an apple. It was a picture of survival, not sustenance. "I can get you something warm," he offered, his tone softer now, coaxing like one might approach a frightened animal. The little girl with the bear hesitated before nodding. Slowly, almost ceremoniously, she lifted the bruised apple with both hands, her small voice carrying more weight than he could have imagined. "We only needed dinner just for tonight." The words pierced through the armor he had spent decades building. He could almost hear the crunch of walls breaking somewhere deep within. This was not about rules or logic, not about liability or consequence. It was about two children sitting in the cold with nothing but each other to keep them safe. And for reasons he could not explain, he felt tethered to them, as though walking away was no longer an option. The cafe tucked into the corner of the market offered a dim refuge. Amber lights glowed against the glass, and the air smelled of cinnamon and steamed milk. Caleb guided the girls toward a booth, their small figures nearly swallowed by the worn vinyl seats. They sat quietly, knees pulled up, eyes darting between him and the doorway, their silence speaking louder than words ever could. He ordered chicken soup, crackers, cocoa with extra marshmallows and blueberry muffins, his voice steadier now. The cashier raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Her gaze, however, followed the children as if to ask questions she would never voice aloud. When the food arrived, he placed the tray down with a carefulness that startled even him. Hazel's eyes widened at the cocoa, her small hands wrapping around the mug as if it were a treasure. Lily carefully blew on a spoonful of soup before offering it to her sister. They ate in rhythm, without needing to speak, each movement practiced. It was survival turned into routine. Caleb watched them silently, something stirring within him. His phone buzzed with reminders and emails, but for the first time in years, he ignored it. As he sat there watching two little girls divide crackers with unspoken tenderness, Caleb realized something he could not yet name. He was not a man who believed in fate. He believed in contracts, numbers, and returns on investments. But here, in this moment, he felt the weight of something greater than chance. It was as if the universe had placed them in his path not to be rescued, but to remind him of what it meant to feel. And though he could not yet predict the road ahead, he understood one truth clearly: he would not walk away. The drive through Asheville's narrow streets stretched longer than Caleb expected. The girls sat quietly in the back of the SUV, their small hands resting in their laps, as if they were afraid to take up too much space. Hazel hummed under her breath, so softly he almost missed it, while Lily watched every passing light, memorizing each turn as though she might need to find her way back someday. The heater pushed warm air through the cabin, but it was not enough to mask the shiver still clinging to their shoulders. He glanced at them through the rearview mirror, his heart tightening in ways he could not quite name. When they reached the trailer park, the sky had deepened into indigo, the last strands of daylight fading against the mountain ridge. The place looked more like a graveyard of forgotten dreams than a neighborhood. Broken bicycles leaned against dented fences, tarps flapped weakly in the wind, and stray dogs searched trash bins for scraps. The girls pointed toward one leaning trailer, its windows patched with plastic and its door sagging on rusted hinges. Caleb parked nearby, his chest heavy. "Stay here," he told them gently. They nodded, their eyes wide but trusting. Hazel clutched the teddy bear tighter, pressing her face into the worn fabric as though it could shield her from whatever he was about to discover. The steps creaked under his polished shoes as he approached the door. The air smelled of mildew and damp earth, and when he knocked, the sound echoed too loudly in the fragile structure. The door pushed open with a faint groan, revealing darkness inside. "Hello," he called. No answer. He stepped inside carefully, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through a cracked window. The sight that greeted him stilled his breath. A woman lay on a thin mattress in the corner, her body buried beneath mismatched blankets. Her skin was pale, lips cracked, and her chest rose only slightly with shallow breaths. A damp towel rested across her forehead. He dropped to his knees without thinking. "Emily," he whispered, the name tumbling out before his mind caught up. The sound of it startled him. Memories he had worked years to bury surged forward in fragments. A rooftop party, her laughter in the autumn air, the way she used to hold his arm when the world felt too heavy. His hand trembled as he reached for her wrist. A pulse, faint but there. Relief shook through him. He turned his head and then he saw it. A photo taped to the fridge, curling at the edges with age. Him and Emily, years younger, smiling like they had believed in forever. He stared at it, the weight of truth crashing down. The twins. The resemblance was undeniable. The pieces fit together in a way that left no room for denial. Behind him, the door creaked. Hazel stood in the doorway, Caleb's coat still draped around her shoulders. Her voice was fragile but steady. "She gets cold a lot, that's why we needed food, so she wouldn't be cold tonight." His throat tightened. He wanted to answer, but the words refused to form. Sirens grew in the distance, soft at first, then louder. He had made the call earlier, almost without realizing it, and now the sound of approaching help filled the silence. Paramedics arrived, rushing into the trailer with practiced urgency. Caleb stepped back, letting them work, his heart hammering in his chest. One of them asked, "Are you family?" He looked at Emily, then at the girls waiting outside, and finally said, "Yes, I think I am." The truth sat heavy on his tongue, terrifying and undeniable. For years he had built walls, crafted a life of distance and precision. But in this crumbling trailer, faced with a woman he had once loved and two children who looked at him with eyes that mirrored his own, those walls collapsed. At the hospital, everything moved too quickly, papers signed, IVs connected, nurses shuffling in and out. Caleb sat in the sterile hallway, his hand gripping an intake form until the edges crumpled. Through the glass, he could see the twins curled together on a bench, Hazel still wrapped in his coat, Lily clutching her sister's hand. They were not crying. They were waiting. Too young to understand the gravity of pneumonia or dehydration, but old enough to recognize the fragility of the woman lying in the ICU. A nurse approached, her voice calm. "She is stable for now, weak but responsive to treatment." Caleb nodded, unable to find words. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, but not in the way of business deals or failed negotiations. This was deeper. This was about family. Later that night, Lily reached into a dented tin box and handed him an envelope. His name was written across the front in handwriting that pulled him back through time. Inside was a letter, short and trembling with truths Emily had never spoken aloud. She had been pregnant when she left Asheville. She had tried to raise the girls alone, believing silence was protection. But now she wanted him to know. "They are yours," the letter said. His hand shook as he folded the paper and slipped it into his coat pocket. The words burned against his chest. Yours. They were his daughters. He did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat with the girls, telling them their mother was safe, that she would wake soon. Hazel curled against his side, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger as though anchoring herself. Lily leaned close too, eyes half shut, whispering questions about tomorrow. He answered the best he could, though the truth was he had no map for what lay ahead. All he knew was that walking away was no longer possible. For the first time in years, he felt the gravity of belonging, of responsibility, and it terrified him as much as it warmed him. The next days blurred into routine, school papers, hospital visits, late nights at the cabin with drawings pinned to the fridge. The girls filled his world with small details he had never noticed before. The way Hazel hummed when she was nervous, how Lily lined up crackers before eating them, the quiet way they both checked to make sure he was still there. And each time he stayed. Each time he showed up again. He began to realize that fatherhood was not about DNA or legal documents. It was about presence. It was about not leaving. But the fragile peace did not last. Jason appeared, his smirk carrying the weight of a threat. He claimed rights through paperwork and past lies, determined to drag the girls into a custody battle they did not deserve. Caleb's blood turned cold. He had not fought for much outside the world of business, but this was different. This was not about winning. This was about family, about the promise he had already made without speaking it aloud. He would not let them be taken, not by him. Not by anyone. The storm had arrived, and Caleb knew he would walk straight into it. The courthouse was not grand or imposing. It was a plain two-story brick building squeezed between a payday loan office and a diner that smelled of burnt bacon and bitter coffee. Yet for Caleb, it might as well have been a battlefield. Inside these walls, the future of two little girls would be decided. Lily and Hazel, the daughters he had only just discovered, the daughters who had already become the anchor of his life. The outcome of this day would mean either safety and stability, or a return to uncertainty, under the shadow of a man who had abandoned them before. The waiting room was crowded with tired faces, the kind of people who had spent too much time negotiating survival. Emily sat in her wheelchair beside him, still weak but stronger than she had been. Lily perched close to her, small fingers tracing circles on her mother's arm, while Hazel rested against Caleb's chest, her small hand twisting the end of his tie as if it were a lifeline. The girls were quiet, but their eyes flicked constantly between the adults, sensing the weight of what was coming. Caleb placed his arm protectively around Hazel, grounding her against the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Jason arrived late, swaggering in with a wrinkled suit and an arrogance that filled the air like smoke. His lawyer followed, briefcase polished, eyes sharp, carrying more confidence than truth. Jason did not glance at the girls, did not ask about Emily. He leaned back in his chair as though the outcome was already his. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. He had spent years mastering the art of patience, of watching before striking, and today that discipline would serve him. When the case was called, they entered the courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 60s, her eyes keen and unflinching, the kind that had seen too many families fractured by neglect and selfishness. She glanced through the files before her, then lifted her gaze. "Let us begin." Jason's lawyer launched into arguments, listing Emily's illness, her unstable finances, her supposed dependence on others. He tried to paint Jason as the responsible choice, citing old-school forms and paperwork where his name had once appeared as an emergency contact. On paper, it looked neat, but truth rarely fit neatly in lines of ink. When the judge turned to Jason for simple questions, the girls' birthdays, their favorite foods, the name of Hazel's teacher, he faltered. He guessed wrong, hesitated, looked to his lawyer for help. The courtroom seemed to shrink around him, exposing the hollow shell of his claims. Then Caleb's lawyer stood. Calm, deliberate, she presented photographs of Caleb with the girls, at home, at the hospital, walking them to school. She read letters from neighbors and coworkers who had witnessed his presence, his care. Each word stacked like bricks, building the undeniable image of a man who had chosen to stay when it mattered most. Finally, it was Caleb's turn. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the stand. His voice was steady, not from rehearsed speeches, but from truth. "I did not know they were mine until the night I found them," he said. "But that does not matter anymore. What matters is this: they needed someone, and I stayed." The silence in the room deepened. He continued, "I did not stay because they asked me to, or because Emily begged me to. I stayed because every time I looked at them, I saw trust being offered. And every time I showed up again, I earned it a little more. I have read them bedtime stories, walked them to school, held them when they cried, and celebrated when they laughed. That is not paperwork. That is family." A faint ripple of emotion passed through the room. Even the judge softened slightly, though her expression remained firm. She leaned forward and asked Lily to step closer. The little girl trembled as she walked, her small hand clutching a folded paper in her pocket. The judge's tone gentled. "Sweetheart, can you tell me where you feel safest?" Lily's eyes darted first to her mother, then to Caleb. She swallowed and whispered, "Where bedtime stories happen, where Mommy gets better, where Daddy keeps his promises." Her words landed heavier than any argument could. The courtroom fell still. The judge leaned back, her hands folding together. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then she picked up her pen and signed the order. Joint guardianship awarded to Mr. Caleb Whitmore and Ms. Emily Hayes. Custodial rights of Mr. Jason Reimer are suspended pending further review. No gavel strike, no dramatic declaration, just a sentence that shifted the axis of their lives. Emily's shoulders sagged with relief, tears sliding down her cheeks. Caleb exhaled, a weight he had carried since that first night in the alley finally lifting. Outside, the cool autumn air rushed over them as they stepped down the courthouse stairs. The girls clung tightly, one to Caleb's neck, the other to his hand. Emily watched from her chair, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. Caleb knelt to their level, his voice quiet but sure. "We are going home." The words tasted like a promise, one he intended to keep. Back at the cabin, warmth spilled from the fireplace, filling the rooms with light. The girls danced in their socks, arguing over which book should be read first that night. Margaret arrived with lasagna, shaking her head at the cheerful chaos. The house, once silent and orderly, now pulsed with life. Drawings covered the fridge. Crayons rolled under the couch. The quiet spaces that once echoed with loneliness now carried laughter and whispers. Later that evening, as the fire burned low, Caleb stood by the window. Emily leaned against him, still fragile but stronger every day. The girls had fallen asleep upstairs, tucked beneath fairy lights and quilts. On the fridge hung a new drawing, 3 hands linked in the shape of a heart, uneven letters beneath spelling one word, forever. Caleb touched the paper gently, his throat tightening. For the first time in years, silence no longer meant emptiness. It meant belonging. It meant home. Some stories are not built on grand gestures or perfect endings. They are stitched together quietly, in the fragile spaces where pain and hope collide. Caleb never planned for fatherhood, never imagined himself kneeling in cold alleys or signing papers in crowded courthouses. But sometimes life does not wait for our plans. Sometimes it breaks us open so that something new, something truer can take root. The night he found Lily and Hazel, shivering in the shadows, could have been just another moment to pass by. A man like him could have turned his head, stepped into his car, and carried on with a life of sterile routines. But he didn't. He stayed. And in staying, he discovered something he never knew he had been searching for. Love does not always arrive with fanfare. It comes quietly, disguised as responsibility. Hidden in small hands clutching a teddy bear or whispered words asking if they are in the way. It grows not through promises spoken once, but through promises kept again and again. Caleb learned that family is not about blood alone. It is about presence. It is about refusing to leave when the storm comes. Emily's recovery was fragile, but the bond that had been broken years ago found its way back through the girls they shared. Together, they rebuilt something stronger than what had been lost. The cabin once filled with silence now echoed with laughter, drawings pinned to walls, music spilling through the rooms. There were still challenges ahead, still scars that would never fully fade. But there was also warmth, the kind that could not be bought or measured, only lived. For Lily and Hazel, home was no longer a place patched with tarps and broken steps. Home was where bedtime stories happened, where pancakes were flipped on Saturday mornings, where their mother's voice grew strong again, and where a man who once thought he had everything finally understood what it meant to have enough. And maybe that is what this story is really about. Not wealth, not loss, not even the victory in court. It is about the quiet miracle of belonging. It is about love that chooses to stay even when leaving would be easier. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, I invite you to stay with us. Because here at Hidden Echo Stories, we believe in the power of love, kindness, and second chances. There are more stories waiting, tales of resilience, hope, and the quiet heroes who remind us that light can always be found, even in the darkest corners. So, if you believe in family, in redemption, in the beauty of small moments that change everything, please subscribe to Hidden Echo Stories. The next story may be the one your heart has been waiting for.